Part of the Willamette River is so polluted, the EPA has ordered Portland to clean it up. But the question, what to do with all the toxic sediment?
Now, they're talking about several ideas, but one of these plans has to do with the St. John's neighborhood, and people who live there are very worried about it. Sally Showman spent the last month investigating their concerns, and here's what she found out.
We see ourselves a little bit as an underdog neighborhood. It's kind of like a Mayberry RFD a little bit.
It's one of Portland's historic neighborhoods.
We still have this small town attitude.
So when the Port of Portland proposed burying contaminated waste within a mile and a half of downtown St. John's,
We have a petition with 2,000 signatures.
people who live here began a crusade to stop it.
The whole idea of putting a toxic waste dump in our community, we have so many other things to deal with here.
St. John's sits perched above a stretch of the Willamette River that's so polluted. In 2000, the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency designated the 11 miles from the Broadway Bridge to Sauvie Island a Superfund site and ordered it cleaned up. The big question, where will the contaminated sediment go? We checked with the EPA. Right now, there are three primary options. First, leave it on the bottom of the river and cover it with clean gravel. Or take it to a landfill. Or third, dredge the contaminants and bury them in two locations along the Willamette River, one in the Swan Island Lagoon and another at the Port of Portland Terminal 4, just west of St. John's.
Taking all those contaminants in the entire 11 miles and concentrating them in the middle of our community for us to be exposed to even more is not fair, it's not equitable.
The third option, neighbors fear, is the front runner.
They've put a lot of money and effort and time into it.
It's called a CDF, essentially a landfill in the water. A wall of sand would separate the waste from the Willamette River. Then sediment would be barged in and piled up in Terminal 4. Eventually, it would be covered with fill material. We wanted to know if CDFs have been successful in other Superfund cleanups. Sean Sheldrake is the project manager with the EPA. What's the track record of CDFs around the country?
Largely successful from what we've been able to gather through exhaustive research.
We found one example of a failed CDF along the Delaware River in 2010. Back then, a news release by New Jersey Governor Chris Christie said the dike within the disposal facility failed, causing a discharge into the wetlands. But we also found success stories. About 150 miles north in Tacoma, there are three waste sites similar to what's proposed in Portland.
So this is it. This is it.
What was once an industrial waterway is now filled with about 70 feet of waste dredged from the bottom of the waterfront in downtown Tacoma.
The vegetation is actually growing on the containment berm.
Mary Henley is a senior engineer with the city of Tacoma.
And it's really functioned as we expected, as we designed.
The performance is excellent. There's nothing slipping out.
Leslie Ann Rose lives along Tacoma's Commencement Bay Superfund site.
We've been here now 24 years.
Her home is within a couple of miles of all three CDFs. She was intimately involved with the development of the waste sites as the policy director for the watchdog group Citizens for a Healthy Bay.
I learned nothing that made me concerned to be living right down here and as close as we are to it.
In the years since CDFs were put in, she's witnessed the bay coming back to life.
Post cleanup, we are seeing results with the diversity of benthic life and the return of certain things that even the size of the crabs and things.
Back in Portland, KOIN prefers the option of removing the waste from the river entirely, taking it to a landfill far away. We checked, that's a much more expensive option. According to the EPA, it would cost $120 per cubic yard of waste versus $90 for the CDF. The cleanup will be paid for by the city of Portland, the Port of Portland, and businesses lining the Willamette. KOIN worries cost has become the #1 issue.
And that's driving this whole process. We feel it's driving the process too much.
It's one factor, but it's absolutely not the only factor.
One of the neighborhood's primary concerns is exposure to contaminants.
There are concerns about some of these contaminants going airborne. In fact, PCBs can go airborne within about a 5-mile radius.
PCBs have been shown to cause cancer in animals, and studies show they may cause cancer in humans too. We asked Sheldrake if airborne PCBs is a concern.
None at all, but that's not to say we wouldn't do air monitoring just to make sure.
Digging deeper, we found a report published by the EPA and U.S. Army Corps of Engineers tracking the progress of 45 CDFs in the Great Lakes region. The report found, based on water quality monitoring and modeling studies, CDFs are retaining more than 99.9% of contaminants they receive. Another big question for neighbors here in Portland.
They're suggesting to put these contaminated sediments, concentrate them all in one area that happens to be a flood hazard zone and an earthquake hazard zone. One does not have to be a rocket scientist to see that that is a problem.
We're looking at a CDF that doesn't have, any reasonable vulnerability to earthquakes, and it's the most rigorous design we've seen for a CDF in the Northwest, certainly, perhaps nationally.
KOIN doesn't buy it and plans to be vocal during the public comment period if the EPA selects the CDF as their best option.
We don't want them to design something that's going to fail, and we feel that there's a really good chance that it will.
Would you live within a mile of a CDF yourself?
Oh, absolutely.
The EPA maintains it's a viable option, one that shouldn't be counted out.
I'd be worried more about a Willamette River that hasn't been cleaned up than I would about a Willamette River that does get cleanup of some kind. And this is one of the solutions that is going to be perfectly safe.
Reporting in North Portland, Sally Showman, KOIN 6 News.
What do you think? Go to KOIN.com for much more information on this project. See the EPA's reports for yourself and animations that explain the cleanup process, and get a look at the most frequently asked questions on CDFs. A decision on this project is expected by early next year, and of course, we'll keep following it and let you know exactly what happens.
All right, Kristen's